And also thanks for coming and sticking around to the very last session of Bad Camp. So your reward is a tiny little hot sauce that's on the thing there. They're Chapter 3 branded. They say, warning hot sites. Only get them here, folks, or at any other Drupal event ever. But thanks for sticking around. It's pretty late on Sunday, so glad you're here. My name is Zakiya. You can find me on Drupal.org as Zakiya and also on Twitter as Zakiya Designs, and I'll go over that again later. I work for Chapter 3, which is one of the sponsors of the camp. So first, before I get started, this talk was designed for people who don't touch the code, the people who aren't reading blogs all the time about how important performance is. Because I found myself a lot of times as a themer needing to explain why I was often having to say no or not now to features that people were asking for based on performance, and I wanted to find a way to like ease into that conversation better. So that was sort of the birth of this. So how many people in here are actually consider themselves devs of some kind? Like you touch the code? So not very many. Project managers, site owners. So like you have to talk to someone, like have to get information or help get a themer to help you out. Okay, great. You keep raising your hand. That's great. And how many are designers? All right. So, okay, cool. So I'm reaching my target audience, so that's great. And for the designers here, you're not going to see, or developers here, you're not going to see code. You might see a lot of things that you've heard of before, but maybe you'll hear about them in a way that's a little different than you was before, and you'll be able to use that in your work as well. So, oh yeah, I said this part. So do I cry? I don't actually cry. Very often because of Drupal code. But I do feel like a bit of a whiner sometimes when I, push back on a certain feature. So, like I said, that's part of the reason for this talk. So I think by now, I used to have a whole bunch of statistics at the beginning of this talk about why all these other sources that said why mobile was important. Is there anyone here who's unclear on why they need a mobile-friendly website? Okay, so everyone's on board now. Everyone's got some sort of phone. And I think also people agree that performance is important, that we want our sites to load fast, that we want them to, and so a couple statistics, users will leave a site if it takes more than 2 seconds to load. And we also know that Google's using performance in its search rankings, so obviously we want to have mobile-friendly websites. We also are generally in agreement, I think most people who are involved in any kind of website, that responsive websites are the way we want to build them. What that means is that we have one website, it can be delivered to any device. This is different from maybe if you were around in I want to say 2010, 2012, where maybe you'd build a separate site, from a mobile site separate from your actual Drupal, your desktop site. We're now delivering one website, many devices. And we've got to have pages that look great at any size, etc. And in addition, Google also wants that to be the design pattern that they use. So why do I often find myself in the position today in 2016 where I either have a desktop website that I have to convert into mobile, or I've been delivered comps that are only desktop and I have to interpret them into mobile? Has anyone else experienced that within the last year or two? One in the back there, for sure. You have? Yeah. So I think that the reason why people are still delivering desktop first are that there's a little bit of a lack of communication between the design community and the development community. I think that's lessening more and more every year. I think the tools we use to build websites, primarily Photoshop, to a lesser extent even Sketch or Experience Design from Adobe, these are all designed so that you have one you have a flat layout that doesn't stretch and bend so it becomes more work to build that mobile experience. Budget is also a consideration. If you've only got so many hours to spend on design, maybe you just focus on desktop. Business constraints, maybe they have an older website, it's been around, maybe it's in Drupal 6, it's been around forever, and there just hasn't been the time or the energy or the resources to turn that into a mobile site. And I think sometimes just benign neglect, just no one's really like come in and said, hey, this is important, we've got to change the way we're doing things. So I'm just going to talk a little bit at first about mobile web development, some of the things that we as the development community talk about, some of these terms. The first is mobile first. This is something that is said by a lot of different people, and I think different people mean different things when they say it. For us who do front-end development, mobile first, really, what we're thinking of is that the mobile experience is the primary experience that's thought about. It's the one that the most energy is put into. It's not an afterthought. It's not a thing we'll do if we have more time. It is the central experience that we concentrate on first. And then we build out the tablet experience and then the desktop experience. It's also a bit of a philosophy. Like when I'm actually physically building a website, when I'm writing the code, like I don't write, this is how I want it to look on desktop by default. And if it's not desktop, I want to do this and this. I actually write, the way we write our code is I will tell you, make the mobile experience the default. And then if I've got something bigger, I'll give you something different. There's also these two terms that are thrown around a lot, progressive enhancement versus graceful degradation. How many people are familiar with those terms? About half, okay. So these are not huge concepts, but these are like terms that are thrown out by people who are, who use this stuff a lot and can be, and I think it's one of those things that if you have it in your head that this is a possibility, then you can be a more informed web consumer. So progressive enhancement would be like you would start with the basics. That's like basically the mobile first, or it might just be like, it's not just mobile, but it's feature first, so the simplest version, and then as you get in probably a larger browser, you can do more features, like there's more to be had. Whereas graceful degradation says, hey, we're gonna start with like something pretty full-featured, but like when this browser, probably Internet Explorer, can't do this, then we're gonna give that person less features. So those are just some concepts that are out there. And I think this might be the most important thing, this lesson about how responsive works. It's that all the markup will go to the browser by default. As the browser itself doesn't know about what kind of device what to do with all this code. The code doesn't know what to do until it knows what browser it is, and it doesn't know it until it hits the browser. I'll explain. So, the browser, your code is all this food. It's the buffet. It's like, here's your JavaScript, here's your images, here's your CSS files, here's your fonts. We're bringing it all. It's all coming to you, right? And then we slowly, then we say like, oh, actually, this is a mobile site. So we're going to start taking away these things, or hiding them, or we're going to delay their appearance on this spot. I think this concept is like one of the hardest for people to understand. Often when I talk to designers or project managers or people who aren't actually writing the code, they'll say, well, just hide that on mobile, or just do this on mobile, or we'll only have that on desktop. Not realizing that from a performance standpoint, they're getting all that anyway. Like the browser's gonna have to deal with it, even if it's just to hide it, no matter what. So other tortured analogies, because I've been working on this for a while. So it's like the browser has to clean up a messy bedroom and they do that by just hiding all the junk in the closet. Or it's designing a house, like you do the design, and then later you find out it's actually a mobile home. Then there's more. I won't torture it too much. But I think the one that I'm settling on, the one that I'm liking the most, but I haven't found a good graphic for, is it's delivering an entire pizza and then throwing away 7 of the slices. You know, so that's what your browser has to do with. You can't stop, you can't stop it from getting there. You got to deal with it first. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's the way things happen most of the time. So another thing that I think is a common misunderstanding between the communities is that apps and websites are different technologies, and you can make your website look like an app pretty close, but it doesn't actually work the same exact way that an app does. It's more like an imitation of an app. So the apps you download from like if you look at the Facebook experience versus if you download the actual Facebook app versus the website, very different experience. The app is so much better. Why don't they just make the website like the app? Because they can't. The technologies are different, okay? So they can get a pretty close approximation. They try their best, but it is not the same experience, especially on a phone. Well, we'll do this one. Another just sort of important thing in Drupal web design is that you want to limit the number of times that your website has to go and get something from somewhere else. This is our dog from work, and I will use any excuse to use this video in any context, but it's him going and fetching this ball out of this automatic ball thrower. When you load like external fonts or anything that doesn't live exactly on your website, your browser, whether it be a mobile browser or a desktop browser, has to go and get them. And that will always slow down your site. I'm going to talk more about that later. Next, I'm going to talk about some common design challenges when you go from desktop to mobile, and how we as developers solve them. The number one question I get in sort of this space is like, how long is it going to take you to do X, Y, and Z? You know, a lot of times that depends on how I choose to solve it, or what is it going to take to solve it, and sometimes it's the technology it's going to take to solve it. So in general, and this is something I also do kind of unintentionally, is I say like, oh, it's just CSS, so no problem. But I don't really explain why that's no problem as compared to like any other scenario, right? So the short idea is that CSS is the least overhead way to make a change to your website. So if I have to only use CSS, if like the only solution to this is CSS, then it's probably going to be pretty easy and it's probably going to take me a minimal amount of time. If I start mentioning JavaScript or jQuery, then there might be a little more overhead, and there's also, it might be more money and it might be more technical debt. It's not 100% true, but it's generally true. And then if I start talking about AJAX and dynamic loading, so this would be a scenario where I say, okay, we're only going to load so much on the page right now, but then like, if you press a certain button, we're going to go and get stuff up from elsewhere and then bring it into our Drupal site, then that's even more complex, and that's going to take even more overhead, right? So someone might present me with a problem, and I might say, well, I can get you 90% of the way there with CSS, but I can give you exactly what you want in JavaScript. What I'm really trying to say is, like, I could get this done in an hour in CSS. It might take me 3 hours in JavaScript, and it might add a little technical debt. And depending on what it is, it might not be a great idea, because then there's another HTTP request. So like, that's what I'm thinking in my head, but it doesn't always get communicated to the client. So if you hear people talking in those terms, that's what they're trying to communicate to you. Let's talk about fonts. fonts are huge. They are very heavy. I think they are incredibly important to design. The fonts you choose definitely are about brand. I don't like telling people they can't use the fonts they want. But they should be aware of the fact that each style of font adds weight to their website. Google Fonts used to have this really great meter. Oh, I accidentally covered it up a little bit. So the one on the right is it would have, for everything you checked, for every style you checked, that meter would go up and up and up and up and up and up. And you could see, okay, I've added this much more weight. I might add 2, 3, 4 seconds to my site by adding all these. If your site's going to be okay without light and light italic, then maybe we don't need to know. You know, like if you haven't compromised your design by using like 2 of those instead of 4 or 4 instead of 8, then you should try to like limit them. The new Google Fonts design is not as clear. It just gives you sort of like a general green, red, yellow. But I think it's an important thing for designers and site owners to be aware of. So as a developer, I wanted to give you, no matter how many fonts, you could have 18 fonts. I want to still deliver them to you as fast as possible. So my options are, I might try to compress the files, and there's some new font technologies that will make it better. I might try to serve the fonts locally as opposed to putting them, getting them from typography.com or something like that. Like with the DDoS attack on Friday, I'm thinking about that more and more of like, you know, you don't want your site to go down because you've hosted your fonts somewhere else. And then, like I said, if you're a designer, the options for you, you might actually be able to cut out more weight than I can by just considering using native fonts or using fewer font styles. Another problem that with going desktop to mobile is like a lot of people would say, I want this to be up, I want this content to be at the very top on, you know, a mobile site, but I want the other stuff to be on the bottom below. This actually used to be a problem, but it's not anymore. It's okay, because we can now, so I had this slide left over and I realized we actually have, CSS is getting better. I don't have to worry about this anymore. There's actually like very simple solutions to this that I don't have to think about anymore. Tables are always very difficult to take from desktop to mobile because it's like, where do you put all that data? I put a link here that has, see if my yeah, it's worked. It just has some examples of like ways to deal with tables, like depending on like responsive tables. What I've found to be the best thing is, they're both design and development solutions. So like you can do swipe tables, or you can write some JavaScript and CSS to rewrite the table on the fly depending on the device. But I think the ideal solution for tables is to think about whatever that mobile presentation is, like start from there and think about how that would look on a bigger site. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but it is a better solution than trying to like do the super squish. You know, it's a hard problem to solve. So that is everything I just said. Duplicated, my bad. Images, of course, are a huge problem or a huge challenge. They're not problems, they're challenges. I would never want to tell a designer to just not use a huge hero image on a desktop computer. Like, that's super important. It's like brand identity. It's expected on the web right now. But we just need to be cognizant of the fact that that same huge, unless we as developers do something about it, that same huge image is going to be delivered to the tiny little device, right? So on our end, so we can cheat. Like, we can just do one little line of CSS and you'll never know the difference, and you'll notice the difference in performance, right? So we could do 100% width on it, but we would rather do it the right way,
which would mean like in Drupal, probably a couple modules. In Drupal 8, they come in core. We might do some settings, but we need people to be aware that like it takes a little more time, money, and planning when we're going to be loading huge. If we're going to be loading huge images on every page, that's something that has to be factored in the budget. Like, so that's not something that just like comes magically to you. It's definitely, I think, worth it. Like this is a thing we should be like making the effort on. But I think people need to be aware that that's what's happening. I also wanted to point out some compression tools that you can use on your end. Rather than, sending around like a 2100 by 4,000 hero image, you might be able to get that smaller by using like Image Optim or TinyPing. Photoshop export, if you know how to do it right, you can get it pretty small, but it's not the best tool. And as we know, the Drupal upload does have some compression, but you lose some quality using the default Drupal compressor. That's like a longer conversation, but that's up there. Another common design pattern that can be a challenge, which it's not even really a mobile, desktop to mobile thing, but just equal heights always comes up. You have to use jQuery to make equal heights work unless you are committed to having the exact same amount of text in every single one of those blocks that's like lined up like that in a scenario. If I had a pointer right now, I'd be like, whatever. But as a designer, you may want to consider that maybe these boxes can flow more organically, like maybe you're okay with that design. Or, is it really important that it be 2-column on mobile? Maybe 1 column's better. And then that's like one little, extra piece of, it's not much JavaScript, but it's just like, if it doesn't need to be there, then maybe we can make another choice, The number of elements, this one comes up a lot, like we'll have 25 on desktop, but we'll have only 2 on mobile. Unless you're using like an Ajaxy kind of thing, all those 25 are still going to get loaded onto that mobile site. I feel like you might as well just show them to people, actually. So as a developer, what I'm going to do is just hide those. Like that's like sticking them in the closet, but they're still like in the room. You still had them delivered. Those extra 21 items, or I could write a little JavaScript to like conditionally load them. I think as a designer, you may want to consider just having the same number of items on both devices it's a cheaper option. Same thing with showing and hiding. We're going to show this on desktop. We're going to hide it on mobile. You're probably going to end up delivering that, unless you've got like the budget to handle it, you're going to end up delivering that to a mobile device anyway. It's going to slow down that device. You might as well show it on mobile. Let's talk about menus. This is fun. So this site that I'm showing right now, I worked on this like a long time ago, and it was desktop only. It was like before the mobile browser kind of thing happened. And it's a college and, limited budget and stuff. And then I visited a couple years later, and they had made it responsive. And I was like blown away because it was like this super complex. It had like 4 or 5 menu systems, but they made it work, and they made it work in a way that is not a horrible user experience. You can kind of see that there's like little menu icons throughout. But this is a hard problem to solve. This is not like a turn on a button, get a thing. So let's take a moment to reflect on hamburger menus. So last time I gave this talk, I went on this whole thing about menus, and menus suck, and menus are terrible. And then at the end, someone was like, what's a hamburger menu, and why is it bad? So I wanted to get that out first thing. Does anyone not know what a hamburger menu is? Awesome. See, that's so good to know. So the hamburger, let me go back to the previous slide, is the name that is developed in the industry for this 3-icon
three-bar icon that usually there's a menu hidden under it somewhere. I think the people who responded that they didn't know what that was just justify a lot of what we'll complain about.
I thought it was a hamburger menu.
Hamburgers. Yeah, it's not where you get your hamburgers, unfortunately. It would be great if every time you click that button, a hamburger was delivered. But does anyone know why this hamburger menu is controversial or considered the devil by some? So the reason why, so if you ever go to a website and the only hint of a menu is that 3-icon bar, study after study, let me find it. I might not be able to find it quickly. Will show that a lot of users can't find them. They don't know what that icon is. They don't know what it's for. They don't. It limits even for people who do know what that icon is and what it's for. They sometimes miss it, and often, but they also have no preview of what is underneath that menu. So when you go to a desktop site, for instance, you will see home, products, whatever, blah, 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 some hints as to what's the organization of the site. When you only have the hamburger menu, you don't get an opportunity to preview what's in the site without clicking. So as a developer, your developer options are always involve, they don't have to involve JavaScript, but they usually do, and maybe some CSS to deal with menus, to deal with multiple menus, to deal with how we're going to organize them. But for designers, I think you actually have a lot of leeway here to improve the menu experience for your users. I definitely recommend reading and subscribing the Nielsen Norman Group blog, and I put a link to it in the slides. They do actual usability testing on things like this, things like search bars, like whether the icon, people are recognizing the icon, and it's just a good, actually tested rather than strong opinion source for design patterns on the web. And they are one of the many people who have found that the hamburger menu has a lot of negative connotations. It's also a very good, easy shortcut to how are we going to solve this difficult problem? I'll show you the pattern that I like a lot in a second. You also want to think about your content strategy. Maybe you should be organizing things differently, and that will affect your menu structure. So I put in here some examples of just straight up hamburgers. I also wanted to show the Guardians, because I think this is a site that has, okay, that's weird. The ad wasn't up there earlier today. Sort of contemplated the menu issue and come up with okay, I'm really not loving this ad thing at the top, but but found a compromise where the things that people are most likely to click, they're still visible on this mobile experience, but if they need to get to more, it opens up this larger menu that has way more choices, but you're not just confronted with basically a blank slate. There's stuff that you want to investigate right away, and then they sort of icon out the rest of these things. And then I put some other good examples that you can check out. Okay, so yeah, menus are hard, but I would not, just don't take it for granted that the only solution is on a mobile site is just to put the big hamburger in the corner and call it a day. Almost final tips. Okay, 15 more minutes to go. So these are just general rules of thumb. If you don't need it on your mobile site, then maybe you don't need it on your desktop site. Just think about it. You might still think that it's okay to look at all this and say I still want these experiences on desktop. I want to spend the time, money, and energy to do these things properly. I think those are totally valid decisions, but they should be informed decisions.
I recommend QAing on a mobile device before, as a product owner or a project manager. QA on your mobile device before you do it on desktop, because it'll be harder on mobile. And you'll find flaws first on mobile. I think performance is an important investment that everyone should make in their website. I think you should care about performance, and I think there is plenty out there for you to be a non-technical person who can learn a lot about performance. Beware of mobile-first, desktop never. You will see this out in the wild of like on your, cinema screen monitor, you get the 3 little icon and nothing else. Don't do that. It's cheaper, but it's not great for your users. Here's a whole bunch of resources about performance that you can Google at your leisure and read, and even more things. I want to specifically point out some of these testing tools because, again, you don't need to be a developer to use something like YSlow or web page test or speed perception, and there's many more. Like you can Google like top 20 performance tools. You can like look at other people's performance, like your competitors' performance statistics too. You don't need a developer to have access to this information. Though beware that like if you're trying to do these tests from a crappy internet connection, don't go yelling to your developer like, it loads really slow. It's like, well, you should know your analytics to know who is viewing your site in what scenario. And I also want to, the idea of perception of page load time I think is also really important and something that can be worked on with a developer, because it may take 2 seconds for my page to load, but if within a second they can do the things they want or they can start to see things that they can interact with, they won't realize that this is a slow site. The classic example is the Facebook, when you go to, or even I think Twitter does it too, when you first go to their site, it doesn't load for a minute, or not a minute, but a sec. But you see these like blue bars that are animating, and they're your hint that like something's happening. Don't give up. Something's going to happen 1 second, and like people don't perceive that as being as slow as it actually is because they've got some hint that the site is working. And so you can work with with the developer on that.
So would it be possible to just animate the hamburger menu to let people know there's more stuff there if you go on there?
Yeah, you might want, it might not be the hamburger menu that you want to do, because you could, not necessarily the hamburger menu, but like something, like a box, or it would depend on what's the most important thing that you want people to do on the site. Yeah. And I would say rather than it being, well, menu's okay because it's like an SVG, but you want it to be like something that's not an image, because an image is going to take more time. And now, some random things that I have come up with in other sessions or in life that I didn't have time to put in this presentation in a proper or clever way, but I wanted you to know. Things like React, Bootstrap, Foundation, like these frameworks that exist, you might hear these words out there, you might be using these things, and some of these, especially like Bootstrap and Foundation, have if you use Foundation and you use all of Foundation, you're already getting like the equal heights library, you're already getting the mobile menu, the way they designed it, so you're getting this anyway, so like those concerns about adding extra aren't as valid. And then if you're using something like a front end, like a decoupled Drupal where you have a front end thing like React or Angular, it's going to be faster probably than like your typical Drupal page load. Oh, I also forgot to put in like varnish. So there's things you can use to cache your Drupal sites too. Like if you use Pantheon, they've got varnish. So there's other ways about this. This is more like the design versus developer paradigm. Ads, if your site runs ads, it's probably going to be slow, and there's probably nothing your developer is going to be able to do about it, because ads are always hosted somewhere else. They always take forever to load. It is a problem. It's why you have things like Google AMP, which is, has anybody ever heard of AMP? So if you start to, I'm seeing it more and more, like if you Google search like a news article, like hint at a news article, like if you search like election 2006 in Google, the first results will have like AMP written in the corner. What they are is like Google has made this platform for publishers, which basically cuts out the ads, cuts out the huge images, makes like the smartest performance decisions, and the pages load like super quick. The module for Drupal needs work, but I think there's this tension between what users want, and users want something like AMP because it's fast almost immediately, and what publishers need, which is like revenue. And the revenue, you'll get way more page hits if you're using Google AMP, but you need that revenue from those ads, but like AMP cuts those ads out. So it's like this is the state of the web right now, is these tension between these competing forces. Optimizely is, has anybody used Optimizely here? I love you all. So what Optimizely does is this thing that is really attractive, especially to marketers, which is they allow you through this like really easy to use UI to A/B test your site. So to see, like, if you're curious about whether this button does better conversions, whether it's blue or it's green, or even want to compare 2 shades of blue, Optimizely makes this super, super easy for someone who's never touched a piece of code to be able to do these A/B tests. Sounds great. And it is, to a point. Optimizely, because it lets you basically rewrite your site on the fly, can be a total hog as far as performance. So I've seen situations where people let their Optimizely get out of control, and they warn you, like Optimizely will warn you, like, hey, this will affect performance. So you're doing this thing that's supposed to figure out what is going to give you the most page conversions, but then but that same thing will slow down your page, which will, hurt your statistics. So, that's one to watch out for, but it's super popular. I don't really have just throwing it out there. It's a thing that people love, and it makes it hard on performance. And I think this is the last one. PHP 7 is just faster. It takes almost nothing to implement. I won't say nothing, but close to nothing to implement. It's available now, I think, on both Pantheon and Acquia. And if your hosting is the reason why, if like you talk to your developer and they're like, well, we would use PHP 7, but the hosting, then change hosts if you care about performance. If they say, we would use PHP 7, but we have a bunch of code that's dependent on blah, 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 then listen to them, So there's a ton of references about all this stuff. I hope that I gave you at least enough to go out in the world and be a more educated consumer of web products. I care a lot about this stuff. If you're a developer and you want a deeper dive on the code end of things, like I recommend, Drew in the back there gave a talk earlier today that I'm sure was recorded about shaving seconds off your site. Like that's probably the next step for you if you care about this stuff. And that's, I think, all I have. Yes. So again, I'm Zakiya. I work for Chapter 3. You can find me on Twitter. Ask me questions anytime. I love Badcamp, but I'm glad it's over. Thanks for coming.